Awesome, we've made it to memory, topic 3. So you're doing well. Thank you for staying along this far. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. And we're going to start having a look at memory. So memory, I think, is like one of the coolest topics that we look at in psychology. How does it exactly work? Who knows? People are very fearfully and wonderfully made, and we are complicated and detailed and intricate, and our memory is just like one illustration of that. It's really, really complicated and like awesome. So that's why we have a multiple different models that we're looking at. So we're looking at the multi-store model of memory. Later we'll look at like the working model of memory, levels of processing model of memory. It's all models of memory. There's like elements and aspects of things we might agree with or disagree with in each, but because it's so abstract, we can't exactly figure out like exactly what it is that we're looking at, how it exactly works, because it's so complicated. So memories are kind of like, in my understanding, is they're stored in like complex networks of integrated neural connections across the brain. It's not black and white and it's not straightforward. But the first store that we're going to be looking at, which is I think a quite common one, and you're probably familiar with a lot of this terminology, is the multi-store model of memory, proposed by Atkinson and Striffen in 1968. And it describes 3 stores, which is where we get the title, the multi-store model of memory, and they function simultaneously and interact with each other. The first one is our sensory memory, which is a very brief store. And the information collected in sensory memory, that's sensory stimuli, is only transferred to short-term memory if attention is paid. So sensory memory is like a store for incoming fleeting sensory information, and actually prevents us from being overwhelmed by the huge amounts of sensory information that we're constantly being overwhelmed with, because we're constantly being bombarded with like visual and auditory stimuli, and we actually can't take it in all at once. So our sensory memory is kind of like the filter to stop our short-term memory from being overwhelmed. So we actually have 2 types of sensory memory. Iconic sensory memory, which is like, it refers like our visual sensory memory, and it has a duration, so how long the memory lasts, of about 0.3 seconds. And we think its capacity is unlimited, which is crazy. So to illustrate that, think about like someone who's like waving like a sparkler on like New Year's Eve, and then you briefly see the after image. That's like your visual sensory memory, just holding on to that information for long enough for you to see like the trail of the sparkler. Your echoic sensory memory refers to what we hear. So echo, think like noise or sound. So echoic sensory memory is like auditory sensory memory, and iconic is for visual, so think like eye. But echoic sensory memory is like that brief sensory memory for our auditory, like sounds. And an example of why that's useful is that so we can actually like retain word sounds long enough to comprehend a sentence or a phrase. That has a bit longer of a duration of like 3 to 4 seconds, which, kind of makes sense because we need to be able to like put together like whole words and phrases and sentences. Our next level is our short-term memory, which is probably what you've like heard of a lot. A lot of people think about it in kind of like what's consciously going into your head. So it's that like limited store of actively conscious memory. It's what's going on in your head right now. And if the information is encoded, it's then transferred to long-term memory. Short-term memory, most people kind of say it has a duration of like up to 30 seconds. Some say 12 to 20, some say 12 to 30, 20 to 30. But kind of like the up to 30 seconds is like a safe kind of estimate for the duration of short-term memory. But it is quite variable between individuals and like different studies and that. And most people say it has a capacity of only about 5 to 9 things. You can only hold about 5 to 9 things in your short-term memory at once. And again, going to be different between people. And if we get time, we'll also have a bit of a look at like how we remember and forget. And then also long-term memory, which is virtually limitless in capacity. The information requires retrieval to bring it back into conscious awareness. And long-term memory is like where information is like encoded by its meaning or semantically and stored in like semantic networks, which is kind of like think about it like a mind map where interrelated information is like connections to it and things are kind of like encoded according to their meaning. So again, it's kind of like a network of memories in our brain. I kind of think about it that way. So kind of like the main key words for like the memory processes here is like encoding, which is kind of like putting it into a form we can store it. Storage is when we kind of tuck it away for later, and then retrieval is when we bring it back from storage into conscious awareness. So memory kind of passes like from sensory memory. If we pay attention, we can bring it into our consciously aware short-term memory. And then if we like encode it or store it away, we can store it away in long-term memory, which has a virtually limitless duration and capacity. But sometimes we do forget things, and there's a few theories as to why we forget things. But that's our multi-store model of memory.